good morning all. We are now on chapters 10 to 14 of the prophet Isaiah. I've titled this Satan's Big Deception. The Hebrew word congregation, or has a numerical reference of H4150, has different English translations as congregations, feast, appointed times, and so on. But we come on to that. Reading from Isaiah chapters 10 verse 1. Woe unto them that decree unrighteous decrees, and that write of grievousness which they have prescribed. Then it goes on to talk about judgment on arrogant Assyria. Reading from verse 5. O Assyrian, the rod of mine anger, and the staff in their hand is mine indignation. I will send him against an hypocritical nation, and against the people of my wrath will I give him a charge to take the spoil, and to take the prey, and to tread them down like the myrrh of the streets. Verse 15. Shall the axe boast itself against him that cutteth therewith? Or shall the sword magnify itself against him that shaketh it? As if the rod should shake itself against them that lift it up. Or as if the staff should lift up itself, or as if it were no wood. Wherefore shall Yahweh, the God of hosts, send among his fat ones leanness, and under his glory he shall kindle a burning like a burning of fire. And the light of Israel shall be for a fire, and his Holy One for a flame. And it shall burn and devour his thorns and his briars in one day. So that's basically saying that God's going to use the Assyrians against disobedient Israel. Boasting. We are warned against it numerous times in both the Old and New Testaments. Remember Deuteronomy chapters 8 verses 11 to 17? Beware that thou forget not Yahweh thy God in not keeping his commandments and his judgments and his statutes which I command thee this day. Lest when thou hast eaten and art full, and hast built goodly houses, and dwelt therein, and when thy herds and thy flocks multiply, and thy silver and thy gold is multiplied, and all that thou hast is multiplied, then thine heart be lifted up, and thou forget Yahweh thy God, which brought thee forth out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage. Verse 17. And thou say in thine heart, my power and might of mine hand have gotten me this wealth. But thou shalt remember Yahweh thy God, for it is he that giveth thee power to get wealth, that he may establish his covenant which he swore unto thy fathers, as it is this day. Now, as we read yesterday, Israel departed from keeping God's law, and they suffered the consequences. Here in chapter 10, we read part of that consequence is God using Syria as the rod of his anger for correction. The Bible talks about correction in the book of Proverbs and Psalms, but I shall read you from the book of Hebrews, chapters 12 verse 6. For whom Yahweh loveth, he chasteneth, and scourgeth every son whom he receiveth. If you endure chastising, God dealeth with you as with sons. For what son is he whom the Father chasteneth not? But if you be without chastisement, whereof all are partakers, then are ye bastards, and not sons. Furthermore, we have had fathers of our flesh which correct us, and we gave them reverence. Shall we not much rather be in subjection unto the Father of spirits and live? Continuing from chapter 10 verse 20, the remnant of Israel will return. And it shall come to pass in that day that a remnant of Israel, and such as are escaped of the house of Jacob, shall no more again stay upon him that smote them, but Yahweh, the Holy One of Israel in truth. The remnant shall return, even the remnant of Jacob, unto the mighty God. Going on to chapter 11, the righteous reign of the branch. Reading from verse 1. And there shall come forth a rod out of the stem of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. And the Spirit of Yahweh shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of Yahweh, and shall make him of quick understanding in the fear of Yahweh, and he shall not judge after the sight of his eyes, neither reprove after the hearing of his ears, but with righteousness shall he judge the poor, and reprove with equity for the meek of the earth. And he shall smite the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips shall he slay the wicked. And righteousness shall be the girdle of his loins, and faithfulness the girdle of his reins. And we also read about this in Ephesians, about righteousness put on the breastplate, and so on. Now the apostles began with this history when teaching the Jews about and getting them to accept their Messiah, Yeshua. See Peter's, Stephen's, and here one of Paul's teachings. Reading from Acts chapter 13, verse 22. And when he had removed him, he raised up unto them David to be their king, to whom also he gave testimony, and said, I have found David the son of Jesse, a man after mine own heart, which shall fulfill all my will. Of this man's seed hath God, according to his promise, raised unto Israel a Saviour, Jesus. When John had first preached before his coming the baptism of repentance to all the people of Israel, get on to verse 26. Men and brethren, children of the stock of Abraham, who Paul means the Jews, and whosoever among you feareth God, which means the Gentiles, as Cornelius, who came to faith. So Paul is talking to one congregation in the synagogues, and that congregation was made up of Jews, those who stock of Abraham, and Gentiles, those who feared God. Continue. To you is the word of this salvation sent. So we see they were not Christians, but who we today call Jews, plus non-Jews who feared the God of the Jews and joined themselves to them as Cornelius. People would like you to think that they were Christians because they were called Christians. No, they were not what they were called. We see they were clearly Jews. Continue from chapter 11, verse 9. They shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of Yahweh, as the waters cover the sea. And in that day there shall be a root of Jesse, which shall stand for an ensign of the people. To it shall the Gentiles seek, and his rest shall be glorious. And it shall come to pass in that day that Yahweh shall set his hand against us again the second time to recover the remnant of his people, which shall be left from Assyria, and from Egypt, and from Pathros, and from Cush, and from Elam, and from Shinar, and from Hamath, and from the islands of the sea. And he shall set up an ensign for the nations, and shall assemble the outcasts of Israel, and gather them together with the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. So we should see the Messiah came for the lost sheep of Israel, to reunite them with Judah, to become one people of Yahweh God. Gentiles could join in also by being obedient to God's laws. Also note the named places from where he gathered them, the outcasts. They were not Africa, USA, or the Caribbean, as some divisive people teach. Now we read yesterday that God said that Israel didn't have knowledge And we saw all the places like in Hosea, they've perished for lack of knowledge. So God is saying that they will once they get back this knowledge, he will gather them back to his way. Going on to chapters 12, reading from verse 1. I should not say to gather them back to his way, he will gather them back to his blessings. Verse 1, chapter 12. And in that day thou shalt say, O Yahweh, I will praise thee. Though thou wast angry with me, thine anger is turned away, and thou comfortest me. Behold, God is my salvation, I will trust, and not be afraid. For Yahweh is my strength and my song. He also is become my salvation. Therefore with joy shall you draw water out of the wells of salvation. And in that day shall you say, Praise Yahweh, call upon his name, declare his doings among the people, make mention that his name exalteth. We shall come on to that name in chapter 14. Going on to chapter 13, the judgment of Babylon. Verse 1. The burden of Babylon, which Isaiah the son of Amos did see. And it goes to say all the things that will happen to Babylon. Going on to verse 9. Behold, the day of Yahweh cometh, cruel both with wrath and fierce anger, to lay the land desolate, and he shall destroy the sinners thereof out of it. Verse 11. And I will punish the world for their evil, and the wicked for their iniquity, and I will cause the arrogancy of the proud to cease, and will lay low the haughtiness of the terrible. Chapter 14, verse 1. For Yahweh will have mercy on Jacob, and will yet choose Israel, and set them in their own land, and the strangers, who we call Gentiles, of some sort, shall be joined with them, and they shall cleave to the house of Jacob. Remember, this is to whom Jacob is, to whom God gave his laws to be obeyed. Verse 14, verse 2. And the people shall take them and bring them to their place, and the house of Israel shall possess them in the land of Yahweh for servants and handmaids. And they shall take them captives, whose captives they were, and they shall rule over their oppressors. Remember from chapter 13, verse 1, this is talking about those of Babylon. Going on to chapter 14, verse 12. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit upon the mount of the congregation. Now pause here, because the Hebrew word for the word translated as congregation is moed. Has a numerical reference of H4150, which I'll explain below. So I'll carry on. This is what God is saying about Lucifer. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Yet thou shalt be brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit. They that see thee shall narrowly look upon thee and consider thee, saying, Is this the man that hath made the earth to tremble, that did shake kingdoms, that made the world as a wilderness, and destroyeth the cities thereof, that openeth not the house of his prisoners? So, explanation of this word congregation, which, as I said, has the Hebrew numerical number of H4150. It's translated congregation in that verse, but it's pronounced moed, M-O-A-D-E. It stands for appointed times of God. Seen in King James's version in Genesis chapters 1:14 as seasons, which are set up by God at creation. So these appointed times were from way before man was created. In Genesis chapters 1:14, is called seasons. Now these are not summer, winter, etc. seasons, but appointed times of worship, as in Leviticus chapters 23 verse 2, where the same word is translated as feast. Leviticus chapter 23 verse 2 says, God speaking to Moses, speak unto the children of Israel and say unto them concerning the feast of Yahweh, which you shall proclaim to be holy convocations, even these are my feast. So they are gods, they are not Jewish. We see this same H4150 Moed word, as I said, in Genesis 18 chapters 14, Exodus chapters 23 verse 15, and Numbers chapters 9 verse 2 as appointed season or appointed times, meaning set appointed days as ordained by God to be his holy days. Satan has deceived seekers to worship him on his set up days so that he sits in their congregations receiving their worship. This is one of the most important changes in practice true seekers of Yahweh God need to make. God is not where and when you meet, but where and when he says to meet. Every day is not the same to God. Christmas, Easter, May days are not God's worship days. They are not his appointed times. And January is not the first day of his month. You read this in Exodus chapter 12 verse 2. For a guide, see the biblical days the Jews keep as holy and match them with Leviticus chapters 23. In other words, look on the internet and you see now the Jewish people, they keep Leviticus 23, but they also have some of the other days as the holidays like Independence Day of Israel and so on. So 2 Timothy chapters 2:15 tells us to study to show thyself approved unto God, not unto man, a workman that needs not be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. Not wrongly, but rightly dividing the word of truth. Now Satan desires worship. Worship comes from religious people. He deceives to divert their worship to him rather than the one true God. Satan keeps them in spiritual prison. Messiah came to release us from deceits of Satan. One of Satan's main deceptions is to change the days of people's gathering for worship. Okay, continuing the last couple of verses in Isaiah chapters 14 verse 24. The Lord of hosts hath sworn, saying, surely as I have thought, so shall it come to pass. And as I have purposed, so it shall stand. Verse 27. For Yahweh, the God of hosts, hath purposed, and who shall disannul it? And his hand is stretched out, and who shall turn it back? Shalom until tomorrow. Happy studies.